Hello, my name is Abdul and I'd like to welcome in another Boeing 737 video tutorial. In this video, I'd like to talk about flap retraction and extension schedule. Both the retraction and extension schedule can be found in the FCTM, and the flap extension schedule can be found in the FCOM as well. So we'll do a flaps 5 takeoff demo, and we'll talk about how the retraction sequence. And before that, I want to just point a few things for you here. In the CDU takeoff ref page 2, as you know, in the CDU Preflight, you set or verify the acceleration height to 1000 or whatever your company is using, thrust reduction to 1000 as well, and then engine out acceleration. For us, we use 1000, so I'm going to set 1000 as well here. And the acceleration height here, 1000 AGL, is above field elevation, and it is shown here in the PFD on the altimeter tape by the top of the white line. Thrust reduction is when the thrust will go from takeoff thrust to climb thrust. As you can see here, we have derated takeoff. At 1000 feet, it will go to climb thrust. There are a couple of white bugs on the speed tape. The first one actually in the airplane that I fly is at 80 knots, and the second one is going to be at V2 plus 15. And as you know, in the before start flow, in the MCP, the speed that we set is V2. We have a VNAV armed for this departure, and the autothrottle is armed already, so with that we'll start the demo. Remember, when you spool up the engines to 40%, you have to call anything. You don't have to say spooling up the engines or engines stable. You just spool up the engine to 40%, make sure that they both are spooling up. Once they are close to 40% or slightly stable at 40%, you press toggle. As the pilot flying, you'll call the FMA changes and then set takeoff thrust. Pilot monitoring by 6 knots, you should verify that the thrust is set, meaning the autothrottle will set the thrust usually to, within tolerance. It can spike up to 4% N1 more than the target, that is fine, but by 60 knots it should be +1 to -0. So in this example, we have 91.1 our takeoff thrust. It should not be less than 91.1 by 60 knots, and it should not be more than 92.1. So that's the limits. So that said, I'm going to release the parking brake. N1 heading select toggle, set takeoff thrust. Thrust set. $80 knots, check.
V1.
Rotate. Positive rate, gear up, gear up. Alright, so we are about 400 feet now. The VNAV speed is now active, and as you have seen, the bug moved from V2 to now V2 plus 20. And this is the white bug of V2 plus 15. Now the white bug is important because below V2 plus 15 you should not go on a bank angle of more than 15 degrees. So that becomes important if you have a V1 cut, because the SID might be engaged in LNAV and you need to turn above 400 feet. So if the speed is below V2 plus 15, you should limit your bank angle to 15 degrees. The second point for this V2 plus 15 is for any flap takeoff other than flaps 1. When the speed is above V2 plus 15 is when you can do the first flap retraction. Let's say, for example, we did a flaps 15 takeoff, then at the acceleration height when the speed is at V2 plus 15 or higher, you can go from 15 to 5 and so on. So now we'll continue on to 1000. I'm going to engage the autopilot as well. When you engage the autopilot, you don't have to say command engaged or autopilot be engaged. Just call the AFDS changes. So it's going to go from FD to command. You just say command, and that's it. So there's the top of the white line for the acceleration height, which is 1000 above field elevation. And the bug now will move from V2 plus 20 to 230. Okay, so now we are above the acceleration height, right? And we are above V2 plus 15. Should we do the first flap retraction? If I were you, I'll not do that since the speed is still trending down. I'll wait for the speed trend to be on the positive side before I request flaps 1. And as we said with the thrust change, as you can see now at 1000 it goes from takeoff thrust to climb thrust. So we'll wait for the speed to change. As you can see, it's still decreasing. Now it's reversing and we have a positive indication of the speed increase, so we can go for flaps 1 or the first flap retraction. So let's say we were doing a flaps 25 takeoff above V2 plus 15. Again, with a trend of a positive increase, you'll go from 25 to 15. So that is the first flap retraction, except for flaps 1. If you were doing a flaps 1 takeoff, you'll wait for the green one to come here before you go from 1 to up. Okay? So for any flaps takeoff other than 1, the first flap retraction is going to be when you are V2 plus 15 or higher. So now we can request flaps 1. And then from 1 to up, as per the FCTM, when the flaps maneuvering speed 1 is here, then you can go from 1 to up. Some of the instructors in the past said if the green arrow is touching the 1, you can retract the flaps. But the way that I understand the FCTM, you should not. I mean, you should wait for the actual speed to be at flaps 1 maneuvering speed. And again, having a positive trend is good, and then you can request flaps up. So flaps up, and that's it. That's it for the flaps retraction schedule. Now, one thing I want to point out to you here is VNAV initially will set 230. It will not set 240. Now it's changed to 28, and we don't have speed restriction below 10. But initially it was 230 until the leading edge devices have retracted or started to retract, and that is to reduce the load on the leading edge devices, and that is mentioned in the FCOM. So keep that in mind when you do the flap extension. Do not request the flaps if the speed is 230 or above, and again to reduce the load on the leading edge devices as mentioned in the FCOM. So use the same logic that the VNAV is using when you are requesting the flaps extension. So now we are done with the flap retraction. Let me show you the table in the FCTM for flaps retraction schedule, and then we'll talk about flap extension schedule. So this is the flap retraction schedule on the FCTM, and as you can see here, you can use flaps 25, 15 or 10, 5, 1. So all of them, the first flap retraction is at speed split V2 plus 15. You go to the next flap. So if you did 25 at V2 plus 15, you go to 15. If you did 15 or 10, V2 plus 15, you go to 5. Okay. And here, if you do a flaps 1, there's no V2 plus 15. So you just wait for the speed to be indicated as flaps 1 maneuvering speed before you go to up. The second flaps is always when reaching the maneuvering speed of the previous flap. So when you are at flaps 15 speed, you can go to 5. When you are at flaps 5, you can go to 1. And when you are at 1, you go to up. And here is the mention of limiting the bank angle to 15 degrees until reaching V2 plus 15. Okay, so now we are on a straight-in approach for to join an ILS runway 34. Here we are about 26 miles from touchdown. And as you can see, there's the deceleration point and that is the point that the FMC or the VNAV will start decelerating from will start decelerating to up speed, so regardless of what speed that you are maintaining. Usually below 10,000 we are using a maximum speed of 250, and this point, if you're using speed 250, it's going to be 20 track miles from touchdown. That is assuming that we are on a constant descent profile. 20 nautical miles, you need to factor the winds in, so for each 10 knots of a headwind you subtract 1 mile, for each 10 knots of a tailwind you add 1 mile, and that is your deceleration point. Why I'm telling you this? Because if you are on a manual descent or on a radar vectors, gauge your track miles to the runway and then decide when to start slowing down from 250 or 240 to up speed. And the other point is back up the VNAV or the FMC always, because remember, just like the mental math, if the sequence of the points is not set correctly in the FMC, this point is not going to be right. So just as a backup for the FMC and your situational awareness, if you know that it is 20 track miles, if you are getting close to the runway, 20 miles, and the airplane is not decelerating to up speed, then you know that there is something wrong with the program of the programming the legs page in the FMC. So the first point that I wanted to draw your attention to now, flaps 1 limit is 250, right? And here we are, the target is 240. So can you request flaps 1 now? Technically yes, but practically you should not. If you request flaps 1 like this, then I know that you are not aware of the logic of the FMC. At least wait for the FMC to sequence to up speed before requesting flaps 1. The second point is, you remember when I mentioned 230 is the VNAV is using on the takeoff to make sure that to reduce the loads on the leading edge devices. So wait for the speed to get below 230. The third point is the FCOM for the flap extension says when the speed is at up speed, you go to flaps 1. So for this reason, before requesting flaps 1, just make sure that the FMC have sequenced to up speed. The second point is make sure that you are below 230 at least. The closer to the up speed you are, the more you are in compliance with the FCOM. But please never request flaps 1 if the target is 240. Either wait for the automatic sequence or go ahead and open the speed window, decelerate, and then request flaps 1. Okay, so we are approaching the deceleration point now. And the FMC have sequence to 189, which is up speed for this weight. Again, do not request flaps 1 now. At least wait until it is 230, or comply with the FCOM when the speed is at up speed, request flaps 1. Or what I do personally for me, I use the range from up speed to plus 20, I go flaps 1. So somewhere between up speed and up speed plus 20, I go flaps 1. At least I am in the lower half of the speed limit range for flaps 1. But don't request it, please, again, don't request it with the speed above 230, and don't request it if the target speed is still 240 in the FMC. And again, usually within 15 miles or so, from 15 track miles to touchdown is a good point to put flaps 1. So 20 to 15 miles is a good place. So go flaps 1. And again, assuming that we are on a constant descent profile, not level. If we are level, we might delay the flaps extension for a while. But now we'll just talk about the constant descent profile. Alright, the FCOM. It says to go from up speed to flaps, or from flaps 1 to flaps 5, is when the speed is at flaps 1 maneuvering speed, you go to 5. What I do personally is when the leading edge devices have a switch to green, meaning that they are in the intermediate position, I go flaps 5. So it's either up to you whether to wait until the speed is at 1, or you can do it now. So I'll do it now, flaps 5. Again, we are way within the range of flaps 5 limit. Flaps 5 is same as flaps 1, which is 250. Gear down flaps 15. 2 miles from the final approach fix is a good place, or as indicated in the profile in the QRH. And at the final approach fix is where you go landing flaps. So that's going to be flaps 30 or flaps 40. For the ILS profile, the QRS says to go to gear down flaps 15 when the glide slope is alive. And for me, I like to just double check that with how far am I from the runway. If you are in a constant profile descent and you intercepted the localized and glide slope at 20 track miles from the runway, then it's a good idea to go gear down flaps 15, 20 miles from the runway. That's going to be too far. So I like to use the profile for the VNAV and the vertical speed, which says 2 miles prior to the final approach fix, you go gear down flaps 15. So usually I'll use that as well for the ILS. So 2 to 3 miles from the final approach fix, or 8 to 7 miles from touchdown, I go gear down flaps 15. I'll set a lower altitude here for the approach and will arm the approach. And remember, when you arm the approach, you need to call the FMA changes, so wall lock, glide slope, arm. So now the glide slope is almost alive, right? And we are showing 13 miles from touchdown. So will I go gear down flaps 15 now? Again, personally, I wouldn't do that. We are already slow. We are well within flaps 15 limit. So there's no point for me to go gear down flaps 15 now. I'm gonna wait until I am 3 to 2 miles from the final approach fix, and then I'll request gear down flaps 15. The other point to keep in mind, sometimes you'll be either too high or too fast for the approach, and you are very close to flaps 15 limit, which is 200, as indicated by this amber line here. If that is the case for you, go ahead and lower the gear a bit early, let the speed bleed off, and then request flaps 15. So the gear is a very nice drag device if you need to slow down. So as you can see now, we are about 2 miles from the final approach fix, about 7 miles from the runway. So we can go gear down, flaps 15, and then flaps 30 land checklist is the final approach fix for all the profiles. If you want to do it 1 mile ahead, that's fine, but so 1 mile before the final approach fix or at the final approach fix, you go flaps 30 and landing checklist, wall lock, glide slope, capture. So flaps 30 and landing checklist. So that's it for the flap extension schedule. Remember, flaps 1, make sure that the speed is below 230, and make sure that the FMC has sequence to up speed before you request flaps 1. You are looking for about 20 track miles from touchdown to start decelerating from 250 or 240 to up speed. Do flaps 1, flaps 5, and then about 3 to 2 track miles from the final approach fix, go gear down flaps 15. If you want to follow the profile exactly, then 2 miles from the final approach fix, and then at the final approach fix, flaps 30. One final point I would like to draw your attention to here is I did not mention flaps 2, 10, and 25. And the normal sequence for the flaps is just 1, 5, 15, and then 30 or 40. While you can do flaps 25 takeoff, flaps 10 as well, you can do a takeoff. You should not do it for the approach because it's not the normal sequence. It is mentioned in a couple of places in the FCOM and the FCTM that this is the normal sequence. And actually the flap extension schedule, which I'm going to show you shortly, doesn't have flaps 2, 10, and 25. The most important thing to pay attention to here is do not use flaps 10 to slow down. Sometimes pilots find themselves very close to flaps 15 limit or exceeding flaps 15 limit, and they say, okay, so let me go to flaps 10 so the airplane will slow down, and then I can go to flaps 15. And I don't like this technique personally, because you are very close to the limit of flaps 10 in that case, and if you hit a gust of wind or for any reason, you might exceed the flight control limit. So again, you can utilize the gear, lower the gear a little bit early, 1 or 2 miles ahead of time, let the speed bleed off, and just follow the normal sequence for flap extension from 5 to 15. If on the other hand, there is an approach which needs a low speed, and you want to go to flaps 10, for example, to satisfy that approach, then by all means. But do not use flaps 10 if you are very close to the limit, or to slow down the airplane because you are too fast for flaps 15. Flaps 25 is the same, so do not use flaps 25. I mean, if you have the gear down on flaps 15 already and the airplane is too fast, just give it some time to decelerate, and once you are within the limit for flaps 30, give even yourself a margin of at least 5 knots below the limit before you request flaps 30. And remember, as always, if you cannot be stable on the approach, just execute a go around and return back for a more stable approach. So with that said, I hope that this video would be of some benefit to you. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. And until next time, this is Abdul. Wish you a safe flying and smooth landing. Thank you for watching.